Welcome, everyone. Welcome. I'm Michelle Carbone, and this is the art of pivoting your life, breaking free, and crafting change. I can't talk today. So, as you know, you can call in and get advice on how to pivot your life if you'd like. And I always have lots of other stuff to talk about that you'll hopefully get something out of. The number to call is 516-623-1240. That's 516-623-1240. And last week we were talking about relationships and specifically traumatic relationships. And I thought I would kind of continue that theme. I talked about it on my podcast this week, which is the Zen Mind Show. And when you're in a traumatic relationship, something that, if you are planning on staying in the relationship or trying to work on it, something that usually happens, most people will not be trusting themselves. They'll be in this state of mind where maybe they're people pleasing, maybe they're just, they're a yes man, maybe they're not in touch with their feelings. And something really important to do is to start to establish healthy boundaries. And part of that is knowing what your boundaries are, listening to yourself. In my hypnosis practice, something that I do for almost every single client is add in the recording that they get is they say yes when they want to say yes and no when they want to say no, because so many of us do say yes to things or no to things out of obligation, out of societal programming, whatever it is. And when we do that and it's against what we actually want, we are not respecting ourselves, and we're basically creating a situation where we no longer trust ourselves because we ignore that small, still voice inside. And that's how sometimes we end up in these relationships where we don't have healthy dynamics and we don't communicate our needs or our feelings, our difficulties. And interestingly, relationships are a place where you can find the most healing, but you'll also be triggered the most. And our subconscious is this huge player in either, getting us into relationships where we're not treated how we want to be, or staying in those relationships where maybe we're experiencing abuse of some sort, be it verbal abuse, physical abuse, financial, etc. And what I'm going to talk a little bit about hypnosis today, because hypnotherapy is amazing, and many people are scared of it. And I love talking to people about the process because it's really not scary. As some of my clients have asked, I'm not making them cluck like a chicken every time Foreigner comes on the radio. But what we do is it's like a shortcut to shadow work. And you might be saying, what is shadow work? If you think about, if you're walking around and there's a pen floating behind your head, you don't see it because it's behind you. But maybe that pen is nudging you this way, that way, and you don't notice that it's doing it, but it is. It's giving you these nudges, different directions. And that's what a shadow really is. It's these subconscious programs that many times we got when we were very young, but we even get them through our whole lives. We're constantly being programmed by things. So shadow work and hypnotherapy go really well together, because when you're in a hypnotic state, you're in that state of alpha waves. Generally, sometimes people go a little deeper, but generally my goal is to get you to alpha waves. And alpha waves are that state where, have you driven somewhere and you don't remember getting there? And you're like, man, I don't remember that drive at all. You were in alpha waves. Your subconscious went, hey, I got this. I know where we're going. Sit back and relax. And you space out. And that's the place you are. Or if you haven't had that experience It's the same place as between asleep and awake. When you're not quite asleep, not quite awake, usually you're very relaxed in that state. And I tell my clients, it's like you're having a conversation with your eyes closed. And recently, I've been working with some cheerleaders on their mental blocks to tumbling. And it's been very interesting to work with these young ladies because, some of them know why they have the block, they just can't get past it. And some of them are like, I'm not quite sure what happened because I could do them, something happened, and then 2 months later, I couldn't do them anymore. And that's because they have a shadow or a belief or a feeling that comes up, and it's stopping them from doing something that they've done many, many, many times. And this is the subconscious work that we're doing. We dig in and find these reasons. And you can do this on your own some too. And with shadow work, what's great is when you're triggered by anything, social media post, your partner, friend, doesn't matter. When you're triggered by something they do, this is your sign. This is the indicator of, hey, there's a shadow. And the reason you're triggered is because of the shadow. Like, I've been rewatching Friends for the 20 billionth time, and we're at that part where, if you've watched it, where Ross and Rachel are having problems because she has a friend at work named Mark, and it's obviously attachment style issues, and it's subconscious because his wife Carol had left him for another person, and now he has this belief and this feeling that he's going to get left, and it's controlling what he's doing in his new relationship. And I find it fascinating to watch shows because I'm like, oh, okay, this character's having this trigger and this one, and this is coming up. And if they were real people, we could work on this. And the show would maybe not be as interesting afterwards because they'd be in healthy relationships. But our subconscious mind is playing a significant role in our lives. It's running 90 to 95% of our lives, which is massive. One of the things, and I've talked about this before, is the familiarity bias, or what Marissa Peer calls one of the rules of the mind, which is the mind loves what's familiar and is going to avoid what's unfamiliar. And we all gravitate towards what is familiar. Something that's familiar seems safe. Something that's familiar is, you know what to expect. And what's interesting is how our mind will choose that familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. And this familiarity bias, scientists deal with this too, right? When they're doing experiments, they have to try to put away their biases. But when it comes to relationships, if you grew up in an environment where you experienced trauma, you saw your parents fighting all the time, just in general, unhealthy relationship dynamics were shown to you, you're going to generally seek out subconsciously similar relationships when you're an adult because it's what's familiar, it's what's comfortable. And I always tell people you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable because that is how you create change. And like the name of the show, if you want to pivot your life and create change and break free, you have to see what's familiar. You have to notice, oh, this is what's going on. I saw growing up that my father treated my mother this way, and I expect that's how my relationship's going to be. I saw this kind of connection being normal. It's kind of like, I made a video on Instagram talking about the familiarity thing, and it's like even little things like when I was a child, my peanut butter and honey sandwiches were made open-faced, and that's just how they were. And I was at a friend's house, and her mom made it where it was closed. The two pieces of bread were together, and I'm like, oh, you did this wrong. And her mom told me that story as an adult, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's hilarious. But think about that. If you've always done something a certain way and somebody does it different, even something like making a peanut butter sandwich, you feel like, no, that's not right. So finding your shadows and finding these familiar things is important in your healing process. So when you're triggered, especially in relationships, look at it as a gift. Look at it as, hey, this is an opportunity for me to figure out what's going on. And then what you're going to want to do is look at the feelings. How does the situation make me feel? Do your best to remove yourself from the situation if you can, so that you have time to think and feel and figure out how you want to respond instead of reacting in the moment. Because that reaction is coming from what's familiar. It's coming from your shadow. And it may not be the way you want to react once you've had time to go, oh, I see. This is my attachment style. I'm anxious in my relationship because 10 years ago I was in a relationship and something similar happened. And then this other thing happened. And now I think that other thing is going to happen in this relationship. So it's really important to get to a place where you can sit and observe your feelings, observe your thoughts. What are my thoughts around this? And some of us are out of touch with our feelings because disassociation is great. You're happy when you disassociated. Or sometimes you're not happy, you're just in neutral. But many people disassociate and feel great because they can choose to just see the happiness in everything and ignore their anger or their sadness, because those aren't fun to feel. But we need to feel those feelings, because if we don't, they get trapped in our bodies. So looking for these shadows is so important to your healing process. And it's important to see why you're in the relationship you're in if you're in one that is not healthy. What relationship earlier in life was similar? Maybe it's your relationship with your father. Maybe it's a sibling. Maybe it was a friend or your mother. I believe we come to this plane, to earth as souls, to experience life, to experience the wide variety of feelings and experiences that we can do. And this is part of it, is going, okay, I chose to experience hate and sadness and anger, and now I'm going to experience the opposite. I'm going to figure out what in my early life created those feelings, and I'm going to move forward. Something else that we can do with the subconscious mind is look for beliefs. Those cheerleaders I was talking about, one of them, I'm going to just express my anger at this coach. Telling a 10-year-old that they're not good enough is BS. There is no reason on this planet to tell a child in any situation that they're not good enough. Because what happens is they believe you. They believe they're not good enough. They believe they're not worthy. And then all they do is become a perfectionist, or they become someone that is obsessed with proving their worth. And you know what? The very fact that they exist means that they are worthy. And you are worthy. Whoever's listening to this, you are worthy. I don't care what you've done. It doesn't make you not good enough. It doesn't make you not worthy. And the way coaches affect these children's lives is huge, because what you tell those children, they believe. And I had the gift of giving a younger girl the gift of feeling worthy and knowing that this coach was full of poop, and that she did not have to listen to and take in the programming that he gave her when she was only 10 years old, because she was good enough. Doing your best is good enough. And it angers me that so many that have, interactions with children will tell them these horrible, horrible things about themselves that are 1,000% not true. So it's really important to figure out what happened to you. Who told you something when you were young? Look back. Maybe your parent told you something. There's definitely parents that struggle with this, because you know what? They have that programming too. Their parents gave it to them, and their parents gave it to them. And somewhere, somehow, it started way back, and it kept getting passed on and passed on and passed on. And it's just sad. And that is what generational trauma in part is. It's these actions and these words that get passed down from generation to generation. And then they create people that end up in relationships where they don't stand up for themselves, where they're people pleasing because they're trying to prove their worthiness. And then they end up being miserable. And that sucks. We're here on earth to experience all the beautiful things that we can experience. And we don't have to stay in relationships where we're not happy. The subconscious also is responsible for these defense mechanisms. I struggled with this a lot. If we're challenged in any way, if our egos get triggered, we automatically just, that defense comes up, and we have to make people right and wrong. And when you're in the place where I'm at, and not everybody may get this, but there really is no right and wrong in my eyes. There's contrast and clarity. If you look into Abraham Hicks' work, they go into that. And when you get defensive, that's a trigger, right? So getting defensive is another key that you can go, okay, I was getting defensive then. Why was I getting defensive? Why was I acting that way? Maybe it's because I thought I was protecting myself from some sort of psychological pain or discomfort. And maybe I was defending how I was acting because I think it's right and my partner's wrong. But really, in situations, there's different perceptions and there's different perspectives. And really, no one's right or wrong. They just have the experiences that they've had. And they're just doing the best they can with the information that they have from the perspective that they have. And I know that's difficult for some to understand. And I would invite you to contact me and we can talk about it because it's really interesting when you can get to this place and observe what's happening instead of being in it. And a lot of times our subconscious is in this fear place. We're fearing abandonment, we fear loneliness, and we stay in a relationship that's traumatic because we think it's better than being alone. Even if we finally wake up to the fact that we're in a traumatic relationship, that we're in a relationship that we're not happy in, many of us don't feel like it's okay to leave a relationship unless there's a quote unquote good reason. And a good reason is not, I'm not happy. Isn't that just sick? Like, it's okay to go, you know what? I'm not happy and I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. Or it's okay to say, I'm not happy and we need to work on this. And here's how. We need to work on open, honest, vulnerable communication. And I need to feel like I can tell you things without you getting defensive and without you blaming me or turning things around on me. I mean, gaslighting is real, y'all. I've experienced that for myself. I got told how I felt, which was wrong. And I wasn't listened to. And I said, no, that's not how I feel. That's gaslighting. I didn't even know at the time. This was several years ago when I was married. I didn't realize that I was being gaslit. And it was mind-blowing to me to realize that the way I was being treated and the reason why I didn't trust myself was because of how my ex was treating me and how he was gaslighting me and telling me how I felt. So it's very interesting. And people talk about trauma bonds, those are so interesting. In traumatic relationships, the victim may have a strong emotional bond with their abuser, sort of Stockholm syndrome, esque. And the bond can develop as a survival mechanism because it's a way to cope with the trauma that's happening. And it makes sense of the attachment to the abuser. But it also makes it very difficult to leave the relationship. So learning about your subconscious and learning where you are and seeing, oh, this is what I'm doing, is one of the ways to work through exiting what you're in, if that's what you choose to do. I mean, there's definitely relationships that have been traumatic that have had healing happen, but both partners have to be willing and open to looking at their own crap from their childhoods, because that's generally what's going to happen. And looking at your attachment style, you know, our attachment style, I recently saw a post where somebody was like, do you really think attachment style is important? And I don't think there's any one thing that's important, but I do think attachment style is a big part of our relationships and how we act in relationships and how we get maybe triggered in relationships. And knowing your attachment style, I mean, there's plenty of quizzes online. Figuring that out is a great first step to working through healing a relationship, if you're both willing to work on that. And to see a lot of times an avoidant attachment style person will be with someone who is an anxiously attached person. And that does not bode well because the anxious person needs validation, they need attention, they need reassurance. And the avoidant person, which was generally how I was, is like, needs space and doesn't want to give you reassurance and doesn't want to coddle you and wants to be alone a lot. And, it's really interesting to see these relationships at play in my practice because, they really, it's amazing to see how these work. In my case, in my marriage, I was disorganized attachment, which means you're both anxious and avoidant, but I was more fearful avoidant. And two avoidant people can have a really long relationship. I mean, mine was, 25 years. So looking at that is very important. And now that we're running out of time, I just want to wrap up and say, if you want to work through your subconscious beliefs, if you want to work through relationship issues, that's my wheelhouse. And I love working with people who are struggling in a relationship where they're experiencing trauma and help them figure out what they want to do and set themselves free. So you can reach out to me at Zen Mind Michelle, that's ZenMindMichelle.com. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you next week.